Yeah.
So we will see if the postman brings anything.
Yeah. Yeah, case in a lot of theatres, I think.
Mm.
Yeah.
Sorry, folks, I lost connection there for a bit, but I think I'm back now. Shall we make a start? Because I think we're happy for you, and we'll see whether others drop in as we go through. Apologies for the mix-up. That seems to be a problem at my end, I think, but I think I've solved it, and I'll send an updated invite via Tim for the final meeting, because I think it will impact on that as well. But I think I've fixed it now. Anybody have any objection to recording the meeting?
No.
No? Excellent. I won't turn that off then. Let's start it up again every time I log in. I'll have hundreds of files after this setup that I'll have to get rid of. But we'll send those out. So to sort of put us in context, I suppose, we did the first one of these a week and a bit ago now, and we had a really useful, fruitful discussion, I think, around predominantly technology, and sort of, I suppose, having a discussion amongst ourselves about what technologies are out there, what's being used, what people might need to upskill on in terms of going forward into a world where there may be more remote working in all sorts of different ways. And we've had apologies today from Ros, because she's working with the old Vic today, because I think Lungs is open now, or it opens tonight. I know it's imminent. So we know we've got people working in those ways already, and Ros is going to be live tonight, which is really nice, actually, to see something that's been done that way as well. So that's really, really good. I think what came out of the last discussion, and something that we wanted to have a look at in this one, and I think it's probably been slightly expedited by the government, or the lack of government, however you want to view that, at the moment, was about sort of what the next steps are in terms of how we as a group of professionals can support venues. But also we had an ADA board meeting last Friday, and at that we talked a little bit about whether there's a need for an open letter, or an updated press release, or a sort of a set of guidelines, just something that sort of says to venues, theatres, but also to television companies and online providers that that this service is essential and is required, and some guidance, I suppose, some guidelines around how that can be achieved, and that there are people out there and how we can support those things. So I think that's where the sort of two bits of business that seem to be most appropriate for today fall. So I think there's one which is a sort of, that's the best way of putting this, one that's a sort of proactive document, which is about us producing something for theatres, venues, TV companies, content producers, artists, whatever we want to call it, about, I always think about those books, and I've got about 8 of them on my bookshelf, the ones that sort of say you want to be a theatre producer, so you want to be a lighting designer, so you want to be a theatre manager or whatever. And I feel like there's a document which sort of reads like, so you want to provide audio description, and it's something that goes down that line. And then I think there's the more hard line, sort of more aggressive isn't the word I mean, but I think you can feel my inference in that document, which just sort of says, well, actually, don't forget about the people that rely on these services, and we appreciate times are tight, but there are standards, and I think that's the other thing that came up through the previous discussion, was about standards, and there was certainly some conversation about the standard of some of the televisual audio descriptions that have been put onto theatrical recordings. I feel like I've got all those words in the right order. So I suppose to start with, we'll just sort of throw it out to the floor for discussion and see what people's thinking is, and whether people feel particularly strongly about this. I think from a board perspective, from Ada, we were quite happy to lead from a collating, writing, assembling of whatever these things are point of view. So I suppose we're on a bit of a content trawl, really, and what do we think we need to be saying and providing on those two different documents. So I'll throw it to you, and you can tell me. Go ahead, Anne.
I was just going to say that quite a few years ago now, I worked on a document for the Arts Council called Action for Access, and it had a big section in it which is sort of how to put an audio described performance on. That's a bit out of date now, but I'd be happy to send that as a starting point. And obviously Vocalise have a plethora of publications that say this is how you do audio description, just in case people want something to start from rather than reinventing the wheel, as it were.
That'd be really fantastic, actually, because yes, we don't want to create something from scratch if there's already something out there which is doing the lion's share from us, and if our role can be to update that and disseminate that, that would be really really fantastic. That changes what the workload and makes the workload more proactive. Jonathan.
I think a very important point to get out there really would be that we've been audio describing for 25 years, and it's been a very slow build to get to the platform that we're currently at. And it would just be such a shame just to go over the hill and slide down the other side into the valley again. And I think this needs to go out to all the professional producers, the venues, and just to let them know that, you know, there is still funding through Arts Council England. I'm assuming it's still on their heavy criteria list of something that needs to be done, and that they really shouldn't forget it. It's just a reminder, really, just to keep it at the forefront.
I think you're absolutely right. I've heard through the grapevine today, and that's it's not an unreliable grapevine, but it's certainly not one that is the most solid, that project grants may well be back at some point in 2020, which I think is earlier than people are expecting, and I would expect other funding streams to come along with those. But as far as I'm aware, the access funding hasn't been impacted too significantly by the redistribution of funds. Nadine, do you want to come in?
Yeah, do you think we should say, and I think, as Anne was saying, rather than completely reinventing the wheel, it's great to have all these papers that have already been produced, but do they actually say why you, i.e. whoever we're sending it to, should do audio description, as well as how you do audio description? Because it slightly tweaks the emphasis to this is something perhaps you should be doing because you have created such a what's the word I'm searching for, you know, you've been successful at doing it, so you should continue to do it. And also, that's my first point. The other is there a definitive legal position on what people are expected or have to provide?
As I understand it, Nadine, the Equality Act basically says that venues and service providers, which is how we're classed, need to make reasonable adjustments.
That wretched word, reasonable. Yeah.
So they could say, well, we
unreasonable word, isn't it? Really? Yeah. Covers a multitude of things. And also, where do the RNIB stand on this? Because I have heard from various patrons that I know, and Jo, who we know well at Vocalise, I'm sure you do, Ada as well, was saying that she is nervous of going out, that guide dogs don't understand 2 metre distancing, and if they are in a theatre, are people who assist them going to be in PPE? All these sorts of questions. That, you know, have we garnered what they feel in order to be able to say what we want to happen or think should happen? Because otherwise it's not a complete document. It doesn't cover all aspects. You know, this is how you do, this is what you should do, and this is what the patrons need. Do we know that? Do we know exactly what they need? Have we done enough? I'm sure we all have anecdotes from people that we all personally know well from theatres that we go to often, but do we have a collective view on that would enable us to put that forward?
That's really useful, Nadine, and yes, it's certainly worth considering. From just to sort of follow up on both of those points, from a venue's point of view, Anne's absolutely right. The letter of the law is reasonable adjustments, and I think what audio description needs really is a test case, a little bit like the Little Mix case with sign language from last year, and until someone brings one of those, I think it's much easier to hide and ignore. I mean, talking from a venue perspective, and here I am virtually in my venue. I actually had some staff back in yesterday, some technicians, and they were sending pictures from the theatre, and broke my heart, to be honest. But hence why I'm now in this virtual bubble. It makes me feel nice. But yes, what's really interesting to ask those questions about what do we need and what are we providing for our service using patrons. We don't even know what we're going to have to do for our patrons yet. So those kind of questions are, again, for a theatre like us, where you know, huge proportions of our audience require some form of access, it's absolutely wedded into the conversation we're already having around how to get people back in, how are we going to manage this, how are we going to roll that forward. But without a steer from the government, which it just doesn't look like we're going to get, particularly not after their publication yesterday. I was in a meeting yesterday day before, with a number of East and West Midlands venues, and there seems to be a feeling from the heavy hitters, the kind of the artistic directors that you would know, that they are going to fill the power vacuum and solve these problems themselves, and sort of basically tell the government how we're going to reopen theatres, and that there seems to be a much sort of a hardening of that line, and I know I was certainly voicing it on Wednesday, but you know, provision for people with access requirements is being considered in those conversations as well. I think, Tim, you want to come in, and I think I spotted Julia as well, so I'll hold you in a queue in that order. So Tim, you go first.
Yeah. I just wanted to mention that I had a quick chat with Sonali Ray about this yesterday, and she can't be with us today, but she's going to be in the one on July 8th. And she was saying that she's happy to help in trying to get sort of feedback from the community on these sorts of issues, which could feed in to anything that we wanted to do. I was gonna I was coming in on what Nadine said about the access and inclusion aspect, and also getting feedback from the community about how they feel. I really feel that angle has got to balance the audience description angle and how we do the audience description, because I think it's all about making sure. I think it's all about making sure that we don't forget the inclusion aspect and all things, including everybody, is still as important. And how do we go about that? So I think creating a balance, I think between audio description and access and inclusion, I think is the way to go. But also maybe getting quotes from people who actually use services and how they feel about things and what they want, and incorporating that angle and that aspect will actually do quite a lot of good.
I was just going to say, again, following on from Nadine and Jonathan, really, that once the theatres, and they've worked so hard to create this audience, and they do have a loyal audience, most of them, to then exclude them is not reasonable. Having created the audience, you can't then exclude them once things get tough.
Absolutely.
Agree. Trish, do you want to come in?
Yes, I was just going to say, I provide accessibility training as well, because I used to be an access officer in a venue for 20 some years. So although I do sort of broad-based accessibility training for not just for arts, theatre, so on, but also just general organisations, anybody that has customers coming through the door, basically. So I do a broad one like that, but I also do, I have some training materials for putting on assisted performances, because that was a key part of my role as well. So I did put on a lot of audio description, captioning, etc. So and worked with many of your lovely faces on here over the years, which is great. But so I have got those materials, and they are sort of online deliverable as well, because I've been luckily had to convert. I was already in the middle of a 6-part training session, the broad training session, with many of the Bristol venues and arts organisations, and so I had to sort of rapidly, and when the lockdown happened, I had to sort of rapidly convert it into online. You share your screen, so you can share your presentation just like you would ordinarily in a room. So that's so far so good. I've done 5 out of the 6. I've got the last one next week. I haven't delivered any of the assisted performances one that I have, but it's the same principle and it's in the same format, so I know it would work. My only thing, and I hope this doesn't sound mercenary, but because literally everything's dried up, obviously I've only just recently qualified as a describer, so that was only obviously November. I was one of the lucky few that managed to do a professional gig before the venues closed, so I did do Anne Juliet in March, but otherwise I do have to sort of safeguard income. That's the only thing. So I can't sort of really give too much of my content for free, but I'd very much be open to if it would be useful at all anyway, over and above obviously Anne's excellent stuff that she's already got, as mentioned, and also all the vocalized stuff. But if it was a training package that needed to be speaking directly to venues, having kind of got that hat as well in my past, then I'd be very up for talking about that. I guess I just can't do it for nothing, but I'd be keen to, offer it up as an option anyway, if that felt workable.
Thanks, Trish. Yeah, that's really good to know, and I don't think any of us would expect you to give that kind of content up for free. But I think one of the things that the document, single or plural, will need to do is a fair amount of signposting. And actually, if this is what you want, this is where you can get it from, and this is where these kind of things are being supplied for. I think one of the conversations we had last week at the board meeting was about, actually, we're looking at the website and whether whether the website needs. I say whether the website needs updating. We know it needs updating, but how it needs updating. And one of the things we talked about there was about the signposting service. Are people coming to the ADA website because they are looking for an audio describer, and can they do that? Similarly, if they're looking for access training, and then are the signposts there? And I think we'd certainly be looking to support those kind of things. We had a very long conversation about training as well, as part of our board discussion. So watch this space on that as well, because I think we're going to look at some changes in regard to that. I think the thing that's worth noting as well, and this is sort of tinged with the sort of sadness of what's going on in the industry at the moment, is that I think a lot of venues are going to be looking to upskill people who've never been involved in access before, because they're going to be amalgamating roles, and they're going to be people are going to be taking on responsibilities that were previously somebody else's post, and that's a really tragic result of what's happening at the moment. But I think that is part of the reality. We all know that that's what happened before we went into a quarantine situation. If a theatre was looking to save money, it would normally be those kind of jobs that would go, and you suddenly turn up at a venue to deliver audio description to find that the access person you've been talking to for years is no longer there, and you're talking to a bar manager who's been given a half an hour responsibility a week to look after access, and that's going to get worse before it gets better. So,
and that was really, I mean, that was already happening, as you say, before this particular situation, and really was why, when I got made redundant, that's why I kind of wrote the materials that I did, because I know that there isn't provision. You're not given a manual when you arrive, and someone says, right, you're in charge of access. So it was kind of, I've written all my materials with sort of embedding accessibility in people's jobs, whether it's marketing, box office, backstage, or anything, just everything embedded in, so that people are not left sort of without any sort of manual to guide them, but equally without anybody else to assist them as well. So it's very, that it's so important, I think, that that's the way it's got to go, and that fits with inclusion anyway, in terms of obviously it becoming embedded and second nature in people's job descriptions. But equally, working the other way for service providers as well, audio describers coming in, or whoever it might be, just knowing that even if it is the bar manager has a checklist that they're following. So my materials are really heavy on checklists, because it's kind of, there is a list, it's probably 50 to 100 things on that list that you've got to do as a venue to spin all the different plates of patrons, service providers and technical equipment, as we all know. But if you just write a good list and follow the list, everybody can then deliver it successfully, So yes, I'm all up for that.
Excellent, great, thank you. Jonathan, your hand is up.
Well, again, Trish, you make a valid point. It's a big shame, actually, because Trev and Roz from the Birmingham Hippodrome were on last time we met a week ago, and they're not here today. They're volunteers, and they look after the patrons when they arrive at the venue. So they meet them at the door, they take them through the whole experience in the venue until they leave, and they'll put them in taxis, take them back to the railway station. And I know that Trev personally came and emailed me after the meeting to say, did we think that there was going to be more of a need for volunteers when the theatre industry reopened, that these roles would be roles that are going to be cut through necessity, through lack of income. And I just wonder if we should start looking at that option for some of the venues. I think, as you were talking about, Neil, the venues are getting together and deciding how they're going to reopen. I wonder, as Ada, whether you should be getting together and assisting them how they can open up their access again, because they're going to have so much on their plates, the venues. If we can make anything easier for them to be able to come to the site, glean information, this is what the patrons are feeling, this is what they feel they would need, and sort of gather that information together. And also look at the volunteers, because I think there are lots of group organisers at lots of the venues who bring groups of visually impaired people. Perhaps we should talk to them. Are they able to take on just a little bit bigger role in supporting the venue, just so that this just doesn't collapse in front of our eyes?
I think you're absolutely right, Jonathan, and I think absolutely on the money about volunteers. I mean, yes, you're right. The guys from the Hippodrome are phenomenal, and I've seen them work, and I know other venues have tried in vain to replicate that service, but unless you've got those wonderful individuals at the heart of it, it's very, very difficult to replicate. Yes, absolutely. I think venues are absolutely going to turn to volunteers in all sorts of ways for at least the short term.
You're breaking up, Neil.
I suppose it very much depends on scale.
You're breaking up a bit there.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, not your fault.
No, it says this is we were having this discussion last week when we were doing the board meeting. Friday afternoon is the worst possible time to do a Zoom meeting because everybody's doing their Friday afternoon socials on Zoom. Monday mornings at 9 o'clock and Friday afternoons are just the worst times, and Sunday evenings because everyone's having a social as well. But yes, I think also slightly depending on scale. So I think those bigger venues, actually, as soon as they're able to start having full auditoria again, their financial recovery, particularly those that are making large scale redundancies, their financial recovery will be very swift. Actually, it'll be the smaller art centres that are going to take a long time to sort of limp back to where they are, and certainly the theatres that rely on heavy subsidy as well. And I think yes, absolutely, they're going to rely on volunteers to plug that gap for a good while yet. So yes, you're absolutely right, Jonathan. The easier we can make it, and I think there are a few bits that are happening that are starting to come together, and the rebuild of the ADA website. One of these things that we're talking about is, does that become a portal for people that they can jump off and jump off to where they need to be to get that information. So
and for people to sign up as well, Neil, so that the volunteers could actually sign up. I think my ethos is that someone who's keen to do it and wants to do it is going to do it so much better than a bar manager who's there to pour pints and order the beer in. So
absolutely. Yes, yes, absolutely, and that's always the case. We find it a lot working within a university. The volunteers who approach us about volunteering, as opposed to the volunteers who are volunteered because of other things they do at the university. You can spot them very easily where they've come from, which route they've come through very, very quickly. So yes, I think that's really important. So I think we're starting to get a sense that there's something that can be started to be assembled here, and I think it is really crucial because I think also for venues who are making huge numbers of redundancies, when they do get back to some kind of operational sort of normality, they're going to have smaller bills to pay, and as such, the kind of the relatively small cost of putting audio description onto a show will be sort of less of an impact on a budget. So so we keep that going as well. Of course, all of this assuming we get back into the venues at some point on the roadmap. Not that there are any dates. Who knows when that might be. I've worked out how I can do a performance in the car park though, so everything's going to be fine. Great. Okay. Does anyone else want to sort of add anything at this stage to that? Things that they think we should be including? Those checklists, Trish, sound fantastic, and maybe we crowdsource one of those. And see where we get with that kind of input. Jenny,
I'm just wondering if there's anyone's thinking about specific recommendations around equipment and the worries that venues are going to have about shared use of headsets and that kind of thing, and whether we can signpost them to headsets where you can use your own headphones, just really basic stuff like that, which is going to actually be the most tangible concern that they have. And also touch tours, and what is there a recommendation that can be put out about what can be done instead of a touch tour, or what part of a touch tour can be made safe? Because I've worked with a lot of venues and companies who've never done AD before. Most of my work has been quite sort of fringy, and often they're quite scared to do it because they can't reach the normal standards, the highest standard. And I think it's important that we encourage people to do something, and as far as possible signpost them to something that is going to be okay in this new environment.
Absolutely would agree. I think they're both really valuable additions. Certainly the equipment one is a discussion we've been having from a venue point of view this week, because we have started to put some plans together for how we might get people back in. And there are always those kind of bits, I think, in the process which are harder, which previously would seem so easy. You know, how do we get headsets to people? Well, we hand them out, and there was the end of our thinking. And now that becomes a lot more complicated. We've been sort of ploughing on with our plans here, and then somebody pointed out that the narrowest part of our foyer, which everybody has to pass to get in and out of the building, is 1.2 meters wide. It's the only way in and the only way out of the building. And it's those kind of, you know, everything, we can do 50 people in our auditorium. This is very exciting. And this is, we've got to get them through that gap. That now creates another. So yes, absolutely, those kind of things. The touch tool thing, I think, is interesting. And this is where I kind of feel like we don't have a precedent for this. And I don't think we have a very simple solution. And I sort of feel like that's one of those queries that's going to require some thought and some discussion between very experienced audio description colleagues, you know, here in the room and beyond, who have run, you know, numerous touch tours and can sort of strategize and have a conversation about how that might, you know, what does a socially distanced touch tour look like? You know, is it possible? To what extent? How can we, you know, and I think on that regard, you know, it feels like something that needs to come from audio describers in the first instance, to sort of say, well, actually, this is what we think is possible, and what we absolutely don't think is possible. And go from there. Jonathan, your hand is up.
I think you've just touched on a really important issue, Neil, of the people that are here in the room and the people that are possibly not working at the moment. I think that for Ada, this is an absolute moment to grab this knowledge, maybe break us down into little working parties. So put a few describers on how we're going to do socially distanced touch tours, do other describers on. We've always had a thorny issue with Ada when I was on the committee about script sharing. It becomes a problem because of the fact that we're putting our script on top of a copyright script from the producer. So there's issues there. But at the same time, the venues will be able to save themselves money. As we start opening up again, if we start to let Ada know what we're booked for, and you can say, well, there will be a script for this, it doesn't necessarily mean that describer is going to pick up the whole tour, because it might be cheaper for the venue to use a local describer where there's no traveling, there's no hotels, but to buy in the script from another describer. And I think that that's certainly a passage of that we could go down, an avenue we can look at, that will save the venues money in the long term, and actually hopefully will get us more work, because I think if they can see that 6 venues have signed up for it, if another 2 sign up for it, it might get 50 quid cheaper every time a new venue comes on board, because the initial startup costs will be spread across the whole group of people. So I think there's other ways of working and ways that we haven't been able to explore before, because it's been a done deal. People tend to use their own describers. But at the moment, I think we're almost resetting the board. We're starting again from zero. And I think this is the time where we can get out there and advise venues how we could do things better for them.
Just before the lockdown, in fact last year, I was involved in a tour that went from the Birmingham Rep up to Northern Stage and a couple of other venues, and we did sort out with the venues that the audio description costs, which were either, I think on one occasion done at the Rep and then another occasion started at Northern Stage, were then going to be shared over all the venues. So the cost of preparing the script and everything was something that everybody did. So that in a sense, the audio description was included in the tour and was paid for by all the venues, which I think spread the cost quite well.
It's always been something we've had conversations about at the arena, you know, well, we pay for it, and then why isn't that then a resource for other venues? You know, we're again, I keep saying it, and I must keep saying it, we're incredibly fortunate in the way that we're funded. It means that we can have scripts provided, you know, and produced for shows that are coming to the arena, often for companies who wouldn't normally do audio description, have never thought about audio description, you know, and makes those happen for us, normally just at the other end of the sofa for me. But that's you know, those scripts have a value beyond when the show comes to us, and absolutely, I think one of the things, and again, global pandemic got in the way, but I think one of the things that I may have mentioned at the AGM last year, and that has been on my sort of long list of things to talk about, is whether Ada wanted to get into the business of setting a rates card for audio description. And then I know Mo had approached me towards the end of last year, sort of saying, well, there's a bunch of theatres asking me, and I'm doing a bit of a straw poll of a few audio describers of what they charge and how much they charge for this and how much they charge for that, and I'm struggling to find any consistency, and is there anything there? And I think when other parts of there's lots of bits and pieces to this, but one of the other conversations we've been having at Ada is how far down the road we need to go towards becoming an advocacy organisation for audio describers. You know, do we need to start journeying towards you know, becoming more like a representative union organisation than just a sort of support organisation, and you know, as a theatre producer, you know, with that hat on, I've got a rate card for actors, directors, designers, lighting technicians, lighting designers. I know what the book rate is for everybody, and I pay some people more than that because they have more value than the rate. But I also, you know, I don't pay people below rate, and actually those things can really benefit. And it means that people don't get taken advantage of. It also means that venues know when they start a conversation, at least the ballpark of where they're getting in terms of cost. And I think often the fear of the unknown, you know, one of the things that we're increasingly encouraged to do in terms of broadening diversity within, you know, staff bases, is to declare salaries when we put an advert out. You know, don't put an advert out with salary to be, you know, undisclosed salaries, because then people assume that they're not going to be qualified enough for that job. And similarly, venues who've never worked with audio description, they don't know, and it's not necessarily very easy to find out. I mean, you could ring me, or you can ring Anne, you know, and you can get a quote, but often people won't go down that line because of concern about, well, actually, once I've rung Anne, somebody who does audio description knows that I'm trying to do it, and so people will be watching me. And when I get, you know, Jeff from the pub to come and have a crack at it, you know, the people will know what's happened. So it's whether as part of that, we also, as part of these guidelines for theatres, we can give an idea, because I've certainly had conversations with smaller venues in my locality where they've said to me, well, what do you pay for audio description? And I throw the number out there, and oh, we thought it would be a lot more expensive than that. And before you know it, within 6 months, they've got audio description performances left, right, and centre. You know, I think Jonathan's right. You know, I think there is some demystifying that we can do through this period as well. And I think it touches on a lot of things that we've talked about: equipment, training, use of volunteers, you know, availability, how a tour might look, how a collective of venues could you know, work together to support a tour. And I think we need to pull all of those things together, and I think this is a really great opportunity to do it. Great. Anybody else want to chime in, as I'm very aware I've been talking? Di, go ahead.
Well, I remember last time you mentioned equity. I know that at one point people were talking about them being involved and so on. I just wondered if anything had come out of it at all.
I certainly haven't had any conversation with them. I don't know if anybody else has.
Neil, just to say, just before I left ADA, I was the equity rep for the ADA committee. And at that point, I don't think the committee wanted or needed a equity to be involved in any way. They are there, they are offering support. We are, I think, the second smallest group within equity. I think Fight Directors are just slightly smaller than us, but we're the second smallest group within the industry. But they are happy, and I have names and I have contacts for you. So if we feel that as a collective, and I think, I don't know if we should do a straw poll, but I suspect probably 2/3 of us are equity members amongst the faces that I can see today. So we are representing the vast majority, equity represent the vast majority of audio describers. So I know that they would be there to support you in whatever route you want to take, and especially at this moment in time, I think.
Excellent, thank you. That's good to know.
Thanks.
Excellent. Did I see Anne? Was your hand up on the beach?
Yes, I think I was just going to say that with the small scale companies, quite often if we develop a script with them, we really try to push them to reuse it somewhere else. In the same way as with the big tours, we encourage them to use it somewhere else. But you do feel that if you've done it for a small company, then for not very much money really, it could then go and be used elsewhere. I know equipment is expensive, but yeah, I think that a push towards some of those producers, some of those venues, so some of the mid-scale and smaller venues as well, who probably just think, well, it's completely out of their range and they can't do it at all.
Yeah, I would absolutely echo that. I think you're spot on, and that often is the issue. You know, I work at the small scale. The companies certainly don't have excess cash to enable those things to go along. There has been a move, I suppose, over the last 2 or 3 years where because it became a sort of easy way to obtain or certainly a good plus to have on your bid. There have been an increase in companies that are touring with audio description, so it's built in, it's paid for, it's budgeted for from the start at the small scale. But those that haven't done that, you know, it does rest on the venues. And you're absolutely right. You know, those, I mean, we make it go a very, very long way, but my access budget for the year is only £4,000, and I can normally double that if we're a bit creative, but it's still not a huge amount of money to do everything we try to do. So yeah, it is often a really big stumbling block, and as we all know, it is going to slide down the priority list when people try and re-establish their businesses. And I think that that conversation that we were having last time about people's willingness to come out, and that's not just people who may be service users of audio description, that's people in general. You know, it's all very well and good as having these roadmaps towards getting the theatres open, but actually, are people going to want to come and sit side by side for 2 hours? And when will that that sort of confidence from an audience point of view come along with it as well? So we have that to consider. Great. Okay. So I'm just looking at time, and I know we started a little bit later due to the technical blip, but it'd still be nice, particularly as it's Friday evening and it's still warm. Some of you may still get a little bit of sunshine before the storms arrive. I'd still like to try and finish on time, but I think we've got some nice things there. It would be great, Anne, if you could send those documents either my way or into the ADA inbox, and I think we'll start assembling something, and then we'll send it around this group for comment or whatever. Probably put it on a Google Doc so that you can all jump in and scribble to your heart's content and try and get something together over the next few weeks. I think we're sort of I suppose if we look at dateless roadmap. I think we're all sort of slowly conceding that a return to any sort of regular theatre is going to be Christmas time at the very earliest, and early 2021. So we do have a fair amount of time that we can start crafting these things. But I suppose moving on to the other part of what we were talking about, whether this go on, Mo, just while I'm wrapping up on this bit, because I'm going to move on to the next bit, so I'll let you cut in while we do this. Go on.
There's 2 points. I think it is a great idea to share scripts, as long as it can be tactfully and sensitively pointed out to the venues that you still need an audio describer to work with the script and not the bar manager. And also that particularly if a venue has a different shaped stage or a different sized stage, the script might need rewriting in parts. The description won't be exactly the same. Because I've had the good fortune to work with other people's scripts, and when they've moved to my local theatre, you're looking at the original script and thinking, well, that's not happening, and that isn't there. So as long as the work of the receiving audio describer isn't sort of downgraded as a result of the script being shared, I think it's a good idea. My other point is about the touch tours. I've done a lot of touch tours where some of my regular customers, for their personal reasons, don't wish to move about. They want to come to the touch tour, but they ask to sit maybe in the front row of the auditorium, or they come onto the stage, but then they personally are not very keen to touch the props or move around the stage. It's fine, that's their choice, but they still feel that the touch tour is valuable enough that they want to get the benefit of it. I find as an audio describer, it's great having people on the touch tour because I can use my description of the set, the costumes, and preview some of the action and visual elements. I know that they've got that under their belt, because when it comes to the 10-minute, 15-minute intro right before the show, very often my customers are not sitting down listening with their headphones in. They want to be buying an ice cream or having a drink with their companions. When I have someone who is, as it were, static, and I'm giving the touch tour, what they seem to appreciate is that I move around the set so they can hear my voice changing. So character A often comes through this entrance here, and I move to the entrance. They can hear from the sound of my voice the sort of distance, the sort of location, and that really helps them orient themselves around the stage action. And I can, lift the chest lid and drop it with a clang or whatever. So they get a sense of some of the touch tour, the aural possibilities, the visual possibilities, without having to themselves move around and turn on the tap of the sink to show that it works and all that kind of thing. So it is possible to do a really good touch tour without your audience moving too much.
It's really great to hear, Mo, and it sounds like there's a nice template there that we could certainly base something on, which would be really fantastic as a starting point, and that we could build on. So yeah, thank you very much for that. Really, really useful. I'm writing your name down for a follow-up email, Mo. Jane.
Neil, I wonder if there's any mileage thinking about the question of the bar manager doing the description. If we set up some convention when we did hopefully make shared scripts more common, that the describer from the last theatre needed the name of the new describer in order to talk to them about the changes that might be and discuss things, so that it went describer to describer, although the theatre could okay the script, but it didn't go to the theatre. That way we might keep it to people who can describe. I don't know.
It sounds like a great idea, actually, Jane. Yes, I like that. It's I suppose goes along that way of building that network as well of people,
yes,
and support support between describers and others. So yeah, that's really great. I've written chain of audio describers, which is.
And just to clarify, when I was saying about the bar managers can do it if they've got a checklist, I didn't mean the AD. I just meant putting on the show, the actual audio describer. I'm not advocating for bar managers to be audio describers as well. I'm not sure that would work, but maybe it would. I don't.
I'm sure with the appropriate training, they'd all be fantastic. But yeah, maybe not just drop that case of Budweiser and come and have a crack at this. I'm sure it's happened. I'm sure it happens more often than we'd like to admit. So just sort of moving on, as I said, I'm just aware of time, and just whether there needs to be this open letter, which they seem to be very popular at the moment, and obviously people are putting together, whether it and we were unclear on this when we were talking about last week at the ADA exec, but whether it comes just from us or whether we actually reach out to colleagues in the fields of captioning and BSL and other forms of access as well, and that the kind of that there is this in the way there have been from plenty of others, but this appealing that people don't leave us behind, acknowledging that the situation is tough and hard, and nobody really knows how we're going to get out of this, but just reminding, I think both people externally, so the funders, the politicians, the investors, that this is a really crucial thing, but also with this letter, reminding people, reminding venues of the importance. And a lot of us know at the moment we're in an environment where people, due to the furlough scheme, in a lot of venues, it is only the top parts of the management structure who are there at the moment. And without wanting to sound too superhero about things, I know I am in the minority as a senior manager of a venue who cares about access. I know that's not the conversations that I'm used to having with other artists. There were a few of us out there, but I think we're probably in the minority, and we certainly access is not a priority at the moment, and I'm sure it isn't, but one of the things that is being discussed at in many conversations. I will just caveat that by saying the conversation I was having across the East and West Midlands the other day was very much counter to that, but you all know the great work that people like Sarah Brigham are doing. So it was that is unsurprising in a room in which Sarah is and myself are both present. It's hard to hide from us for too long before we start bashing heads together. Jane, I think your hand was up first.
Well, a couple of things really. Yes, those who've talked to Ros Chalmers, who can't be here this afternoon, who is also a captioner, will know that, according to her, the captioners have been hung out to dry, really. They have absolutely nobody standing up for them. They're completely stuck, and some of them are in fairly dire straits. So I know they would like very much to come along and join us with any access initiative.
Great, thank you for that. Tim?
Yeah, I also think it would be a good idea to maybe have some of the organisations like RNIB, those who are deaf, perhaps the autistic associations, to come on board and endorse it as well. Because I think by having the big organisations that represent those in the community is going to have a lot more weight if we want to get the media interested in this.
Yeah, absolutely. Trish, your hand is up.
Yeah, I was just also thinking, I was just going to say what Tim just said actually as well, but also, did we all see that hashtag last week, was it, or now the week before possibly, the "We Shall Not Be Removed" hashtag, sort of disabled-led arts organisation, sort of Grey Eye Unlimited, etc. et al., all really sort of coming together in this kind of, we don't want to be written out of the arts and not be. So I know that's from the arts side, but sort of as allies and sort of counterpoints of all of that, alongside RNIB and Guide Dogs and National Autistic Society, Action on Hearing Loss, etc., those representing individuals, but also maybe joining with disabled-led arts organisations, and it being one sort of, because that's a massive lump of people then, isn't it? You know, all kind of pushing forward for, you know, advocating for arts provision, delivery, inclusion, etc. That would be quite a hefty voice.
It would, yeah, and I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. And to get
Andrew Miller and so on, because they're really pushing all that agenda forward, aren't they, on that side?
Absolutely, and Jenny from Grey Eye and you know, Get Unlimited on board and Mind the Gap, and yeah, we can, you know, there are all the agents for change as well, who are, a lot of them are still active out there, and bring them all on board, and probably worth a conversation with Avid at the Arts Council as well, because I'm sure he would get behind and support as well. So that's becoming quite a formidable list. Nadine, your hand is up.
Yes, I'm probably going to be a bit controversial, which will come as no
Good.
surprise. But when I first became an audio describer, which is, I don't know, 12, 13 years ago now, I can't remember, it was the first time I'd ever worked as a freelancer in a non-profession, if you see what I mean. And I was absolutely stunned by the breadth of the numbers of people involved, and the differing charges, the differing way different theatres dealt with things, the way different individuals dealt with each other, the way describers were pitching for jobs against each other and all this sort of thing. This was all very new to me, and to a certain extent I found it very difficult. And this has been the traditional way, rather than it being, there are pockets of people who belong to collectives. There are bigger companies, there are small companies. And everybody I've met has been absolutely delightful and absolutely committed to the job that they do, and wanting to do a really good description in our case. And I'm sure that's the same for the liners and everybody else. When it comes to something like this, as to pick up on something Jonathan was saying, this is a very rare opportunity to give ourselves a wider voice and a more collective voice, if we're all willing to do that. And that will involve some changes that may be uncomfortable for some and welcome for some. But theatres at the moment can, well, they go to the lowest common denominator quite often, certainly the smaller ones. But if we are a collective, and if we are sharing more and more involved together, which some people may hate. I've never been a freelancer before, so it's a totally new life to me, and I don't come from a theatrical background. I come from a medical background. So it is a very, very different world, and I appreciate that, and I may be treading on toes, but I think it is an opportunity to have a more collective group that can really stand up for what we stand for, which we have only done in some pockets are more powerful than others, and theatres will listen, and others struggle. Whereas, and they're doing just as good job as everybody else. And I think if we stood together more, which was why Equity started, to stand together for all these people, I think we would have more power when everything comes. Power is the wrong word, but I think it would make life better for everybody concerned in the access movement. And I don't feel, when I started, I felt it was very much compartmentalized. And I think personally, I would find it much better if we could be more collective. And as I say, that may be a very, very, very controversial point, but it is an opportunity for us to all get to know each other and all pool our ideas and all make it better for all of us if and when it starts up again. Just a personal view.
I couldn't agree with you more, Nadine. There's lots of nods and thumbs up, and general agreement seem to be bouncing around all the boxes that I can see here. Yeah, absolutely. And I think everybody, that's a sweeping generalization, but lots of people are doing exactly the same. You know, that there has been a coming together of small venues. You know, venues I've been trying to talk to for years have suddenly, you know, answered my emails. I think one of the things that the lockdown has done is, and as sad as it is, that we're not in the venues and we're not in rehearsals or, you know, welcoming companies or doing whatever else. We've got to do something to fill the 40 hours a week. And so actually I know I certainly have, for the first time ever, I've got to the bottom of my inbox in my email account. I've responded to emails that have been sitting there for 3 years. I mean, I will get back to you, I promise. I've actually been able to do it, and I think it's brought together parts of the community. I think you're absolutely right, Nadine, and I think that's the conversation we've been having at ADA Exec, was actually, should we be making that move towards a more advocacy approach rather than just a we're here to help and support. Go on.
And it's not a theatrical example, it's a medical example, because my other job, because a lot of us need more than one in order to pay the mortgage, but my other job, I work for Leicester Medical School, the university, in training medical students, and they do a pilot scheme and have been trying to push this pilot scheme for some time. It's called and it's about the future and how much our future depends on technology. And this pilot scheme is how teaching medical students to extract information from a paper purely by email, to come to the right medical conclusions at the end of it. And for years, people have been trying to persuade, particularly GP practices, not necessarily hospitals, that this is a good idea. Oh, no, it's not a good idea. It's not a good idea. It's dreadful, dreadful, dreadful. All of a sudden, we have a pandemic. And every GP and his dog is ringing patients, emailing patients, videoing patients. In other words, this dreadful situation has caused something that they had no interest in, or didn't feel they had interest in, or didn't think could help them. Now, of course, they're all clamoring to be part of this course because they have realized that it is valuable. And it's in that sense that I feel we have a real opportunity to make ourselves really valuable as a collective. I'm going to shut up now.
Yeah, I absolutely more than welcome, Nadine, and I think you're absolutely right. We've seen exactly the same in the university sector. The push towards online teaching, or blended learning, as they like to call it. I've been told off for calling it online teaching, but this move towards a more online model, the universities have been wanting to do, particularly universities like Wolverhampton, post 92s, have been wanting to do for years, and they've had a lot of resistance, predominantly from the academics themselves, and from the middle of March they were forced into it, and this brave new world has been thrust upon them, and you know what, it's gone all right, and in a lot of cases it's gone really, really well, and it will be the future. I think you're absolutely right, Mo.
I just want to echo what Nadine said and what you've just said, really, and the example she's given and that you've given about educational health is just a reminder to us. It's not about just strengthening us, it's about strengthening our profession, because it's not about us, it's about them. Anything that we do to make audio description stronger is ultimately going to support our patrons, and we are here to enable them to access live entertainment. Yeah. So it's kind of our duty to strengthen the profession. That's what I feel, because ultimately it's got to benefit those people. They are the end receivers, and they're the ones that matter.
Absolutely, thank you, Mo. Yes, absolutely right. Yeah, it's Brian. I think thank you so much for your contribution. It's really, really valuable. Thank you so much. Yes, and we are screaming into 4:30, and the sun's still out in Stafford, at least. Paula.
Hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Hi, Paula.
Yes, we
Hi,
can hear
Paula.
you.
Jo here. Hi. Hi. Thank you so much for letting me listen in on your brilliant conversation again. As the end recipient, I am very grateful for all of the work that you're all doing to try and get access back high up on the agenda. Really appreciate it. And you know, brilliant, good work, and you know, keep going. I also, just one quick thing about you know, what happens before a live performance with the touch tour and everything. And I think I can't even envisage it at the moment. I just can't even envisage it. And anything you can do to make it possible would be wonderful. I'm at a loss to see how it can happen. So I shall watch this space with great interest. You know, I also think that perhaps more of that information beforehand, you know, available on disc or on a website or whatever, you know, that's all going to help. But you know, roll on the day when we can do a touch tour and feel comfortable about it.
Absolutely. I think we're all looking forward to that day. Yes, thank you so much, Paula. And you are, as always, welcome, and always a great contribution. So thank you so much for that. So going forward, I feel like we've got a couple of bits of work to do, maybe 3 bits of work, and I came in expecting us to come out with 2. So the third one is always a bonus, and at least there aren't 8. One is putting together this guidelines document, or I suppose finessing those that we've already got. One is collaborating on this open letter, and then the final one is sort of this potential, I don't know, specific guidelines around what a socially distanced touch tour could look like. A couple of thoughts about how we might handle this. One is as most, or Jonathan suggested, sorry, that we set up a number of working groups to look at that. Another, and I don't know whether any of you are familiar with this, but we've been using a system called Slack, that's SLACK, through the Arena to manage things during this pandemic. It's basically a message board sort of system where you set up a series of areas where people can log in and discuss different bits and pieces and collaborate work on things. We found it incredibly useful. I'd be more than happy to set one of those up for this group. It sits on your there's a website. You can access the website and just drop in, and whatever, there is an app that you can download as well. But it might just help being a sort of central repository for things and ideas and places that people could chip in and we could work on things, and also a discussion group. So that may be a way forward. One of the things we talked about at the exec meeting last week was we have one more of these in the diary, but Tim certainly said that he'd had a lot of positive feedback about them, and that there was they were felt to be useful and productive. I've sort of got space in the agenda for the next one to talk about whether we want to keep doing them, but also conversation about there being a space where there could just be maybe a sort of less time structured conversation, an area for people to ask questions and help people and offer support and just chat. Sometimes that's what the Slack has been really useful for us, you know, just sit and have a chat for a while. One of the things that I said I would do is Ada are paying for this Zoom license, so that we've got this Zoom room. I'm very happy to make the Zoom room available to anybody that needs it in the interim. So if people either need to have meetings that require that longer Zoom license, or just want to use it as a meeting place, then just let me know. Assuming we haven't got one of these scheduled, it's available and it's there, and feel free to use that as a resource as well. So those are my proposals, sort of going forward. Actually, I think I've got my Slack open at the moment. If I just show it you can maybe see what I'm thinking. I'll just share my screen on that. So this is the Arena Theatre one, and this is me having a conversation with my marketing manager. But as you see on the left hand side here, there are a number of conversations that are going on about various bits and pieces, and access for our new streaming project that we're working, this clearing project, other bits and pieces, and you can just drop into these and chat. You can tag individual people so that they can see that they are being spoken to directly in the conversation. anybody can set up a new channel for a new thing, and then there is a direct messaging service as well, so you can talk directly to people and send direct messages. We found it really useful. I just wondered if I set up one of those and created a channel for the open letter, for the guidelines, and for the socially distanced touch tours as a start off, then maybe we could start getting that conversation going. And what I would really like to do is bring a draft, and I'm very happy to lead on this, but is to bring a draft of the open letter back to this room on July the 8th, which is the next one of these we've got scheduled, and try and get it to you a couple of days in advance so people can have a look. And then we can have a discussion around that. And in the meantime, if people, I will get in touch with colleagues I know who I think can contribute. But similarly, if people have colleagues who they think, you know, are from organisations who would countersign, I'm thinking, Jonathan, you know, colleagues at the Opera House, you know, Tim, you colleagues at the National, you know, people who can start, who will want to be the co-signatories to that, then we'll do that, and we'll also get the recording from today up in there. Mo, yes, thank you very much. You don't all have to call me boss man. There's only actually one person at the arena that calls me boss man, and it's very much something she insists on, not me. I'd like to make that very clear. It's not to say I don't enjoy it. It's not something I've insisted on. But yeah, she does call me boss man, but it's certainly not obligatory. I get called a lot worse as well. So it's probably why I quite enjoy boss man. So we'll get those set up in the next couple of days, and we'll see how it goes. And if people have things that they really feel should be included, I think my email address is out there. You know what? If it isn't, I'm going to just stick it in the chat now, so everyone's got it. So you can get in touch with me if you want to in the meantime, if there are things you want to include, and we'll try and get that letter in draft form by. If I try and I'll get it to you by the 6th of July, so then we can have a conversation about it on the 8th. I will also resend the meeting invite, because I think the bug that caused the problem today would have caused a problem for the 8th as well, so there'll be a new invite, and I'll ask Tim to send that round. Does anyone else have AOB before we wrap this up? Laura's just chipped onto the chat to say that she's to say thank you for the panel, and that she's on a panel in Denmark for audio description. So yes, Laura, absolutely, anything you can send us, and we'll send things your way, and we'll send an invite round for the discussion group to the wider group, so that people can contribute. So thank you for that. Laura's just saying there is no audio description in theatres as of yet. Laura, there's probably a much longer conversation you and I could have, because I've worked on a number of trans-European projects over the last 5 or 6 years, putting audio description into countries that have never had it before. So I'll be in touch. If you could drop me an email, Laura, that'd be great, and we can have a conversation. Lovely. Well, I will send you all on your way to this glorious evening. Yes, thank you all as well.
Thank you so much.
I'm finding these really valuable.
Yeah.
So,
yes. Thank you, Neil.
No,
Brilliant.
an absolute pleasure. And we will see you all again on the 8th. And again, an open invitation to anyone that wants to join us on that day as well. Enjoy your weekends. Make the most of them.
Thank you so much. That's really
see you all
great.
very soon.
Bye.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.